Good morning, everyone. I'm Tom. I'm a compulsive overeater. Um, I want to start by saying I do a lot of Zoom calls for work, and I'm constantly in sort of sales mode with groups of clients presenting presentations and convincing them to do proposals. And my associations with Zoom is that it's an energy suck. I put into it, and I'm putting stuff out there. But this morning, I'm just overwhelmed by all of these faces, and it's a completely different experience. It's a sort of it's a gross inflow of energy coming from the room. So it's a real privilege to be here, and I really wasn't expecting to see so many people as well. Um, so I'm a little bit nervous. And if there's one thing that I have asked my higher power to help me do this morning, it's to reflect how flawed I am as a human being and how flawed my recovery has been, and yet communicate the sort of experience, strength, and hope that comes from that. And the fact that even though I've worked my program sporadically and imperfectly, I've still enjoyed an incredible measure of peace of mind, and happiness as a result, which I think is incredible. So I suppose in summary, my message is it works if you work it, even if you work it in it fairly craply, um, which is great. So a little bit of background. I'm 51. I was born in the early 70s as an only child of an alcoholic mum. My parents divorced very early. I grew up with quite a stern, strict stepdad. And my childhood, I would say, was comfortable but not particularly happy. My parents were, my parents were often at loggerheads, and as an only child, I used to sort of hear a lot of arguing, a lot of discord in the household. My mum was very loving and nurturing, possibly a little bit sort of overweening, what we'd probably call a helicopter mum now. Um, and my relationship with my dad was always just sort of quite distant. So from quite an early age, probably 7 or 8, I remember food being a source of comfort and a source of distraction in the household that, particularly in the evenings when the three of us were watching TV in the sitting room, we would have an evening meal, and then there would really be a constant sort of flow of snacks coming in. So unlike probably in a household where there's a healthy attitude to food, where there might be 3 meals a day, um, for us, dinner was just the beginning of, a process of sort of self-medicating through food, at quite a young age. Um, and as I grew into a teenager, um, my sort of poison of choice very young was I was pretty precocious, and I got into sort of drinking and smoking and girls and then drugs at a very young age. And during my teenage, my I remember becoming sort of body conscious. My nickname at school was Chubs, even though I actually wasn't chubby. I've always had a slightly round face, but I look back at pictures of me at 15, 16, and I was this slim, athletic, rugby playing boy. But I was nicknamed Chubs, and I was body conscious from quite a young age. But when you're drinking and smoking and taking drugs, it was pretty easy for me to moderate my food. And I got into recovery for alcoholism very young, at the age of 19. And for 2 or 3 years, when I was working the 12 steps in AA, um, my food was actually under control because I was working a 12-step program. It just happened to be, for alcohol and drugs. And it was really in my early 20s when I started to drift away from AA, and the sort of urgency of the problems of my drug and alcohol addiction subsided, that food really started to come up. And I'd always been a binger. So I would be able to sort of be quite restrictive during the week, for example, but then on a Friday night, I'd go to a party and I'd feel sad and insecure, and I'd feel too scared to talk to any girls, and I'd come home early because I didn't drink, and I'd buy a big bag of shopping from a 24/7 garage or
That's your
something.
first 5 minutes, Tom.
Thank you. And really binge on large amounts of food. For me, it was sort of cakes, ice cream, chocolate, crisps, and often quite industrial quantities, a sort of whole shopping bag of food. And I would binge until I was never bulimic, but I would eat until I felt very, very sick. Um, and then I would sort of put it down for a week or so. And I've always been quite obsessive about exercise. I was a boxer at university, played a lot of sport, and would be sort of healthy for the week. But then I'd crack again on a Friday or Saturday. And as I got older, the intervals between those binges just got shorter and shorter, to the point where by my mid 20s, I was doing it pretty much every day after work. I would come home, or on my way home, I would pick up something, and sort of at 7 or 8 in the evening, I would binge on food rather than even bother preparing an evening meal. I would just sort of have a bag of assorted crap from Tesco's, and not bother cooking an evening meal. So I came into recovery for the first time. I first went to my first OA meeting in about 1999. Um, and was pretty much the only bloke in the meetings in those days. There were very, very few of us, but instantly identified with everyone. It was just like it was a feeling not unlike the feeling I'm having now of sort of getting into a warm bath of I thought I was a freak, and I'm not. I'm not the only person. That there are actually tens, if not hundreds, of people that experience this constant shame and compulsion and obsession that I thought was unique to me. And that in itself was unbelievably healing. So I kept coming back. And I got a sponsor, um, and got abstinent, through the steps, in my late 20s, and actually spent about, um, probably 7 or 8 years, broadly abstinent. So 3 meals a day, no white flour, no sugar. I had periods on the HOW program, which is a very draconian, I think it's called grey sheet in some circles, where you weigh and measure your food. And I experienced a massive amount of spiritual growth and sort of recalibration of my emotional well-being. But of course, because I'm me, I didn't keep it up. And I got married. I actually met my wife in recovery. I met her in OA, and we had kids. And I blame them really. It's all gone wrong since I had kids, who were just an incredibly handy excuse for me to say, well, I'm too busy. I've got too many commitments. I can't go to meetings. So really, I mean, and my son is now 14, my daughter's now 12. And so I sort of dropped out of the fellowship really when they were born, and just got more and more sporadic. And my definition of abstinence just got looser and looser. So in my mind, I was still abstinent, but I really wasn't. And I wasn't talking to a sponsor. Um, so that really takes me to about sort of 2 years ago when I started coming back. And I had what I'd noticed during that period is I'd sort of tried everything. I've always, as I said, I've always been heavily into exercise, and I'm probably an exercise addict. But I found that I couldn't out exercise a bad diet. So my weight was just creeping up. And I came back into the rooms, in Southwest London about 2 years ago. And about a year ago, I got serious, and got myself a sponsor and started working the steps. And what I did this time around was probably no different to what I've done in the past. But I think partly I'm just at a different stage of my life where I have a little bit more time and freedom to devote to recovery. But I knew that I had to get a sponsor because my food problems were such that I needed to have a daily check-in with someone. I needed to be accountable to someone on a daily basis. I didn't overthink getting a sponsor. I actually chose someone who is 20 years younger than me. And at the time that I asked them to sponsor me, they only had 9 months recovery themselves. But I could see that this,
That's 10 minutes.
thank you. I could see that this person had what I wanted, which is he had worked the first 9 steps. He was abstinent, and he had a measure of spirituality and just a vibe about him that I really liked. And for me, it was quite humbling to be a 51-year-old man choosing to learn from a 30-year-old man. And that was part of the process for me. It was a process of sort of humbling myself to say I have a lot to learn from this much younger person. Um, so I started calling my food in or texting my food in every day, which was tremendously liberating. And the other thing that I did for the first time was I'd never really done this. I did a very sort of rigorous definition of what my abstinence was going to be. And I sat down with him and I went through all of my trigger foods, and listed, and got honest about the foods that were really triggering for me. And that was transformational because I just had to let go of things like pizza, that I could occasionally eat pizza normally, but mostly I couldn't. Um, so that clear boundary around what my food plan and what abstinence was for me was incredibly helpful. Um, and then we started working through the steps, and we did it at lightning speed. I did the first 9 steps in my first 6 months, basically, quite deliberately. And I didn't probably do them perfectly, but I did them at pace, which gave me a real focus, um, and that was enormously helpful. And I had a 5 or 10 minute check-in every evening at 8 p.m. with my sponsor, which again was really helpful for me because it just meant that it was right in my sort of red zone. That evening period was when things would go off the rails for me. So to have a call at sort of at 10 past 8 and say, right, I've got 90 minutes till bedtime and I'm going to make it through and put my head on the pillow abstinent. Um, and doing the steps with him was a real pleasure. Step 1 was very easy for me. I could see all of the stuff that I tried. I knew and have always known that I'm powerless over food, and I also knew that my life was unmanageable. Step 2, I was very willing uh, to come to believe that a power greater than me could restore me to sanity. Partly because the only thing that had worked in the past, and I had some evidence that it worked if I worked it. Step 3 for me has always been very conceptual and quite loose, handing it over, made a decision to turn my will over. I never know if I really have turned my will over, but I said there and I meant it. Step 4 this time round was smaller than my first step 4 that I'd done in previous fellowships, but still incredibly valuable. And I think what I learned at the heart of character defects was the main thing I learned was that is fear I'm a fright of everything. And fundamentally, I have a limiting belief that I'm worthless. And everything comes back to those two things. Step 5 was great. It was a complete non-event, as it should be, in terms of my sponsor was totally unfazed by anything that I told him, even the things that I thought were really awful. Um, and then all the way through to sort of step 9. And I'm now doing sort of 10, 11, 12. And I think for me, that's where my challenges lie, which is the maintenance steps I find hardest. Ticking off 1 to 9 had a sense of sort of finishing a project. And as a perfectionist and a workaholic, that was fairly easy for me. Where I struggle on a daily basis is the maintenance steps,
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. The maintenance steps. So reminding myself every day to take an inventory, regular prayer and meditation and conscious contact, and passing the message. Those are the ones that are much harder for me. And I just want to stress I'm far from perfect. In the last few weeks, I've noticed little bits of extra food creeping into my plan that I haven't put on my plan or told my sponsor about. So there's little bits of dishonesty that still dog me. Last night I had a Chinese takeaway that I thought was sort of pretty okay. And I'm almost certain it was full of sugar because I shouted at my daughter about an hour and a half after I ate it. Um, and sorry, my timer's going off. Just try and yeah. So I find that now if I have even a small amount of sugar inadvertently, I actually go a bit crazy. I get very, very angry. So I am constantly having to
Thank
sort
you.
of
That's time,
thank you.
Tom.
I'll wrap up. I'm constantly having to sort of recalibrate and check in and force myself to be honest with my sponsor because what I find is if a little bit of dishonesty creeps in about the small things, then it becomes a bit of a slippery slope. But the level of peace of mind that I enjoy now and the level of normality that I've got, the level of availability I have for my family because I'm not constantly thinking about food is incredible. So it's a massive step forward. It's not perfect, but my life is genuinely transformed from where it was even 2 years ago.
Thank
Uh,
you,
I'll
Tom.
leave it there.